I knew Jaco Pastorius quite well. We kind of grew up together, you might say. In fact, my very first gig I got as a leader, I was 16, and I was sitting in with Ira Sullivan at the Rancher Lounge, where Ira had a gig for years. And somebody said, "Hey, I've got a little club up in Fort Lauderdale. Why don't you come up and bring a trio, play bass and drums?" And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll do that." And I knew a drummer, but I wasn't sure. I didn't really know a bass player who would work for that little money. I think it paid $30 for the trio. This is 1968, and it still wasn't $10. Wasn't good then. It's not good now. It was not that great then either, but it was a little better. But anyway, I had no bassist. So Alex Darqui, Darqui, was a pianist from a Frenchman, played very nicely, and worked with Ira Sullivan. So I told Alex, I've got to find a bass player. And he said, "I know a cat. In fact, you guys should meet. He's a young guy like you, maybe, and he lives up in Fort Lauderdale. And he might be the perfect guy to do this." So his name is Jaco Pastorius. So I called Jaco on the phone, and he said, "Sure, let's do that." So I decided we would rehearse at Jaco's house and get repertoire and play a little bit together. So I went up from Miami to Fort Lauderdale and went to Jaco's house where he was living, and we played the afternoon together. And, we had an interesting, meld of personality between the two of us. We were both very sure of ourselves in many ways. Jaco more than I. Jaco was 17 and I was 16. I think Jaco was born in January of 51, and I'm born of March 52. So we're very close in age. And when I asked Jaco, I remember asking him, "Well, who are your favorite bass players? Who's your favorite bass player?" He said, "I am, me." I said, "Really? You're your favorite bass player at 17? He said, "Yeah, if you're not your own favorite bass player, then why do you do it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm doing it for a number of reasons, but I can't really say I'm my favorite saxophone player. There's quite a few cats I prefer to me, at least right now." And I thought that was funny. So first of all, I wanted him to play upright because I didn't really like the electric bass, and I was very stubborn too. And Jaco said, "Well, man, he had an upright that he was playing." He said, "Let me bring my electric too." So he had an amp, and so he wanted to play the electric. So I let him play the electric, I believe. He did mostly electric. Maybe he played one or two tunes, like Green Dolphin Street and this and that on the upright. But midway through the gig, or midway through the first set, Jaco just started to play E7 with a funk beat. Boom, 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 boom. He had the drummer play a funk beat, and we played. I blew on the E7th, and then, 3-4 minutes went by. I blew on it, gave him a solo, and he's playing his stuff. He could play then. He's running around the way he could. Only he could. It's the germs of his style were there, and but then he wouldn't stop. So now we're going on 20 minutes. And he just won't get out of this E vamp, his E7th vamp, and I finally get really disgusted with him. Come on, man, it's my gig, and I want to play some tunes. I don't want to just sit and play E7th all night, and so we had words, and he. I don't believe he came the second night. I think I said, I may have even said, "You're fired," which was funny because it was my first gig. I'd never hired or fired anybody before. But anyway, we didn't, that was a split there. So now I didn't have much to do with him. Shortly after that, I went to live in New York, and my whole life changed. I was around Miami, but we would now and then run into each other, but we weren't really friendly. But when I was coming back from Brazil in 1974, I stopped in Miami, and I went to sit in with Ira Sullivan at a place called the Lion's Share. I remember that, in Hollywood. or Hallandale, one of those places, in Miami. And he had the band, and Jaco was on bass. And I sat in, and we had a great time. Jaco was sounding beautiful, and we played a version of "If You Could See Me Now," which I still remember. It just was one of those beautiful performances from beginning to end. We all felt it. And after the set, the gig was over. We hung around together. Jaco and I talked, and we laughed about how we'd both been so stubborn. And Jaco told me, well, he said, I really do listen to other bass players. And I said, yeah, and I'm starting to feel that, I'm trying to become more myself. Maybe it helped me to, that you were telling me I was trying to imitate too many people and all that. Maybe it's good. And we laughed, and, we felt very warm toward each other that night. I remember that was a nice feeling. So a few years later, or not even a few years later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, you probably would know it, who I'm telling the story to, what year it was exactly better than I, because it was the year that Jaco really hit the scene with the Jaco Pastorius record with Donna Lee that everybody, listened to. I got a call from Frank Clayton, who was a bass player, drummer, and Jay Clayton, who was his wife and at the time, and she was a singer, and she sang in some of my groups. And Jay, they said, "Hey, one of your homeboys is at our house." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, Jaco Pastorius. He's here with Gil Goldstein." And I had known Gil because Gil went to the University of Miami, and I was hanging out at the University of Miami when I was a teenager. It was a different story, but oh, great. Well, I didn't live far. They lived in what's now called Tribeca on Lisbonard Street, and I lived in the village on McDougal Street. I said, "Hey, I'll come over." So I came over, and I brought my horn, and I brought a couple of my tunes. And we played the afternoon with Jaco and Gil and Jay and Frank. And we played Jaco's tunes, Las Olas, and this tune about a secret. So we played the afternoon at Frank's house with Gil and everybody. And then afterwards we went to Chinatown. Just the three of us, just Jaco and Gil and I. And Jaco expressed how he wanted to come and be in New York and live in New York. I was feeling a little bitter about things. I had left Chet Baker. I was in the process of putting my own band together, and gigs were not coming forth the way I wanted them to. So I kind of said to Jaco, well, New York can be pretty rough. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes, nobody wants you, So, of course, later I used to joke about that with people. I'd say, "You want my opinion on something? I'm the guy that told Jaco Pastorius not to come to New York." So, and unfortunately, later that prophecy turned out to be a little bit have some truth in it, which I wish it hadn't. I told him the intensity of the city could overwhelm you sometimes. And he had a very nice marriage with his first wife, Tracy, who had been his high school sweetheart. And I don't know if they had children, but he was down in Florida. I said, come stay in Florida. Let them call you to come up and play, in places. But keep your home life together. And, at that time, Jaco didn't do any drugs. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke a joint. His father had been kind of a rounder, as they used to say, who got around, and indulged in a lot of things. So Jaco was adamantly against all that. Well, we went to dinner, and I gave him my advice. And a few days later, maybe a week or two, I heard that I think Gil Goldstein told me, "Hey, Jaco, making a record with Herbie Hancock, and he's getting it signed by Columbia, and, the rest is history." So, Jaco went on to, revolutionize the electric bass anyway. And time passed. Another year or two, and Jaco was with Weather Report. Now, at Christmas time, I used to come down to Miami. I was living in New York, but I come down to Florida, spend some time with my mother. And my brothers and sisters were down there. And I would, while I was down there, I would play with Ira Sullivan and Tony Castellano, and Joe DiOrio was down there, all these wonderful musicians in Miami, Dolph Castellano. And there was a trumpet player. Ira had a gig at a place called Bubba's, and he always came and sat in, who was actually a medical doctor, a family doctor, physician, general practitioner, they used to call them. I think now they call them primary care. Anyway, I would have my checkup with this doctor, who will remain nameless, because he had two personalities. He was doctor, and then there was the trumpet player. The doctor was a straight arrow, very straight, very good. You could trust him, sober. The trumpet player was a madman. This guy would be high on all kinds of things and come in and play. I don't even know how he drove a car. I wouldn't get in the car with him. Anyway, he would have jam sessions at his house on his day off, which was, I believe, Wednesday. So I was down in South Miami, living in my mother's place. I was staying there. And he was up in Pompano, which is quite a ways if you know Florida. But he would send a limousine to pick me up. He would also send a limousine to pick Jaco up, who would come in from Fort Lauderdale. And he had a guy named Tibor, I forget his last name, on piano. And Barry Romberg, I believe, was often the drummer. And an upright bass player named Ray McDonald would play. And so Jaco would play like a horn, because there were two basses. He would come and play electric bass. Now and then Otello Mottolio, the pan player, steel drum player, would join us too. So this particular session, everybody was waiting for Jaco, and Jaco finally he showed up. But I got there, and these, Rick, the doctor, had ashtrays full of, an ashtray of cocaine. He had like big pile of marijuana. So all the joints you wanted to smoke, you could smoke. And if you wanted to do blow, you could do that too. Plus his liquor cabinet was absolutely without end. Anything you wanted cognac, you wanted vodka, you wanted scotch, whatever. It was there. Not to mention beer, wine, of course. And they even were getting high on ether. These cats were getting high on ether. So I had my moderate amount of things, but ether I couldn't really get into. Anyway, Jaco showed up. Now, I knew Jaco not to do any drugs at all, as I said. And he had been with Weather Report for a while now, and he was bringing over the test pressing of the record Black Market. And this was a different Jaco. All of a sudden, Jaco was like talking about getting high, and he was doing all these things, and drinking. And, he still was, we got along fine. In fact, that day we played some music that was beautiful. I could still, another time I remember, just a beautiful version of Stella by Starlight, among other things that we played, with Jaco like a second horn, or maybe I was the second horn, I don't know. But it was, it was really lovely. I was surprised that he was getting high like that and everything. Now, more time passed, and there were a couple other experiences I had with Jaco that were kind of funny and rather endearing. A mutual friend of ours named Sam Chiodo, a bass player who Jaco had kind of grown up with, was getting married, and he hired for the wedding a band consisting of Ira Sullivan, Jaco. Actually, Don Kaufman was the bass player, and Jaco was sitting in with us. And Eddie Crissetti on drums, and Tony Castellano on piano. It was a good band. And Sam said, you guys, we said we're going to have to play like commercial things. We're going to have to do a cha-cha and these kind of things and polkas and that. He said, no, you guys play jazz. And that's it. I mean, just don't worry about it. Jazz, maybe some bossa novas, but, don't compromise, And we said, okay, they'll dance and we'll play nice music. So we did that, and Jaco was there as a guest. And he may even have been best man for Sam. And I'll never forget, he had a tuxedo on, with sneakers and white socks. I thought that was funny. And so he was sitting in with us. He sat in with us. And Sam said the second set, he said, that first set was really nice. We played Daddy's Little Girl, and we played some Gingy, and that type of thing. Nice, palatable jazz. And he says, but some of the people here, man, they want to hear polkas, and they want to hear a line dance. Like they want to hear, some people want to hear, Zorba the, Never on Sunday as the line dance and the whole commercial thing. So we said, okay, we can do some of that for them. Why not? So I'll never forget, Jaco was sitting in, and he never played a polka. So we played the beer barrel polka. And Eddie, I don't know, Don Kaufman was elsewhere for the moment, and we just went into it, and feeling Jaco's going to play the beer barrel polka. But he's like, whoa, what's this? He'd never played a polka. So he just had to go bing, dong, ding, dong, ding, dong. And he was making faces. It was cracking me up, like, ooh, and then getting this thing to get ding, dong, ding, dong. So then we roll out the barrel. We'll have a barrel of fun. So meanwhile, he got to know this. And within a few minutes, we're going, roll out the ding, dong, ding. We'll have a barrel of a roll out. It cracked me up, man. He was playing some stuff that was really funny. And, we laughed and we had a nice time. And he was on his second marriage, and I met his twins, Felix and Julius, and his second wife, who seemed very nice. But I was worried about him because we were indulging a little bit in between sets in what the Prudential used to call a piece of the rock. So we were doing a little bit of that. And he was drinking. And, I worried about him with that. For some reason, he didn't seem like a normal person doing that. So there was the next phase of our relationship was in Montreal. And I had moved there. I had a teaching gig offered to me, and I taught there for a couple of years. And there was a little gig during the jazz festival at a place called Les Beaux Esprits. So I was there. I brought a quartet into that club. And Jaco was there for the festival. And I've been hearing stories about him acting strangely, like getting on the stage with Tito Puente and them having to take him off the stage because he wasn't invited, and him just stumbling around and hearing all these weird stories of his behavior, which I was surprised because I hadn't known that side and I hadn't seen him that way. Anyway, he came into my gig, and he just pushed my bass player aside, almost like physically. Boom! He was a big guy too, Jaco. He was tall, and he shoved my bass player aside and picked up the upright bass. And Alex Foster was with him. The two of them came in, and they had been having, they were feeling no pain. And they started to play E7th again. So Jaco just kept on the one chord, and the drummer funked out, and, the cats played that. And I sat down after 20 minutes of E7th. I said, here we are. What is it, 25 years later? And, 20 years later anyway. And, we're still playing E7. I'm still arguing with him about this. So we, I let him do what he did. And we sat at the bar, and he said, we hugged each other and we talked. And, we used to joke. He would say, I'm the world's greatest bass player. And I'd say, Jaco, you are the world's greatest electric bass player, I think, and probably the best composer of our generation. But, as long as Ray Brown, Percy Heath, and these cats like that are walking the earth, you're the best electric bass player, which is like being the flyweight champion of the world. And you would crack up at that one, flyweight champion. And So Jaco said, he telling the bartender, he said, let me buy you a taste, Bob. So he bought me a taste, and we're sitting there at the bar, and he says to the bartender, this is my man, this is my homeboy. My homeboy, he bought me, I mean, this cat hired me, it was his first gig, right? And one of my first gigs. And he fired me. And I said, Jaco, if you behave like this, I'd probably fire you again. You know, what's with you? You know, we started to, you know, and I'm fine, don't worry about me. I'm, you know, just enjoying life. And I said, okay, you know. But I was worried about him. I was worried. And then from there, you know, I'd heard stories about him and his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. And I only saw him one more time after that. He didn't even, I think, have a place to live. He was in New York. And like my prediction, there he was in New York. And he just, you know, nobody would hire him because he was erratic. He didn't know if he'd show up or what he'd do if he did show up. And I believe that he was probably bipolar and, you know, would have needed some, you know, some medication, but nobody helped him that way. I wanted to, but I was spending the summer in New York in the mid 80s. And right toward the end of Jaco's life, a year before he died or so. And there was an after-hours club that was run by a guy named Freddie. It was by day, it was on Sullivan Street. By day, it was a candy store. And they had a soda fountain. And at night, after hours, it turned into an after-hours club where you could buy drinks at the soda fountain. And Freddie would, that's a different story. I won't digress there. But as I was sitting there, I was with the girl I was with at the time, and I was sitting at the bar. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and Jaco came in. And we started to talk, and I was thinking that maybe we should, you know, we could play together. We could make another band, play some tunes, and use him like with the second horn, you know, like a quintet with an upright bass player and him. And I wanted to talk to him about trying to do that together, maybe. And he said, "Yeah, okay, that'd be, you know, let's talk." I also wanted to talk to him about if there was anything I could do to help him in life, you know. You know, I did care about him. And he said, "Yeah, I'll be back. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and then we can talk." So he went to the bathroom, and we waited for about a half an hour. And then the girl I was with said, "I just don't want to wait any longer. Let's go back home. We got to drive to Brooklyn. We were staying in Brooklyn." She said, you know, I'm tired. And I said, "I really want to talk to my friend." She said, "Well, you know, you'll see him again probably, you know." And I wasn't sure I would. And I didn't. Anyway, we did have some nice moments together. And, you know, he was a really, you know, sweet guy, basically.